بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين أما بعد. Adam, what does hadith mean linguistically?
Anything attributed
Linguistically. Alright, sonically.
Anything attributed the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam from his sayings, his actions, and
Approvals. And two more.
sayings, his actions, his approvals. Sayings, his actions, his approvals.
His physical characteristics and mannerisms. Hadith linguistically is
Something new.
something new. So hadith linguistically is something new, and sonically anything attributed to the Prophet ﷺ from his sayings, action, approvals, physical characteristics, and mannerisms. So 5 things in total. Hadith. Asma, difference between hadith and sunnah.
Hadith is more specific
In what sense?
in terms of its specific action about certain sahaba, about certain things. The sunnah, it's general guidance.
Okay. Hadith and sunnah are the same. Hadith, I don't know about saying it's more specific, but hadith is anything what the Prophet did and said and so on. But sunnah is more general guidance.
General guidance.
So, for example, you would say 2 rak'ah before Fajr is sunnah. Using a swat is a sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So that's the guidance. You don't say it's a hadith of the Prophet. Even though it's common hadith, just the way it's used, you wouldn't use it like that. But sometimes it can be used synonymously as well. Okay. Shakir, the relationship between the Quran and Sunnah. 3.
First one, emphasizing and agrees with the Quran.
Emphasizing the agrees with the Quran.
Number 2, clarifying the experience.
Clarifying the experience.
Number 3, adds certain meaning to what's which is not.
Add certain knowledge. Muhsin. He mentioned 3 points. Give me an example for 3 points. So the Sunnah emphasizes that which is already in the Quran. Give me an example.
Is to follow the messenger.
Sorry?
To follow the messenger.
To follow the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Good. Okay. The Sunnah explains and clarifies what's in the Quran. Example? What do you mean?
Also, you said an example.
Yeah, just give me an example. Give me an example. So the Quran mentions something and the Sunnah explains it. For example?
Sunnah says, obey, if you obey me, and you obey Allah.
You move to the next topic, which is proof to follow the Prophet.
So, for example, Quran says pray.
Quran says pray.
Yeah. So the Sunnah explains how to pray.
The Sunnah explains how to pray. And the last one, which was, what was the third one?
Add certain.
The Sunnah adds things. Example.
So that would be like the example you gave was for wearing wearing silk. Men are not allowed to wear silk.
Men not allowed to wear silk and gold. What is it?
Spider, big one.
So you're surprised I gave an answer.
I think you had an electric shock.
Yeah, I don't know. Right. We got a tissue or broom.
The best day to go and hide. Cook!
Are you allowed to kill it? Oh, don't kill it. Don't kill it. Don't kill it. What do you do?
Just get a tissue and take it out.
There's no tissue.
There's a bin outside if you can throw in a bin.
Okay. are some ahadith where the Prophet prohibited the Sahaba from writing down what he said. And there are some hadith where he commanded people to write down what he said. How do ulama reconcile between these two seemingly contradicting hadith?
The ulama, the scholars said this means that it's prohibited to write down at the time of the Prophet ﷺ whilst revelation was coming down, so the Quran doesn't get mixed with hadith and the people don't get confused. And after the Prophet ﷺ passed away, they want to capture the hadith and the sunnah, so the scholars said it's permissible to write down hadith after.
So during the Prophet it wasn't allowed?
Yeah, it was. Yeah.
People, you got an answer?
It's not allowed to be written on the same piece of paper.
Anyone?
So if I've got 3 years, is first prohibition was earlier, and then afterwards came permissibility. That's one of the ways the ulama reconcile. Another one is combining between the two ahadith, like the example they mentioned. You can't write on the same paper as the Quran. And the third one, so say that hadith which prohibits is not cool. So I think
The way the ulama look at it, there's 3 types. So different ulama say different things. You can summarize into 3 different opinions. The first is abrogation. To say that hadith, or those hadiths which prohibit, was initially, but later on Prophet ﷺ, he committed it. So the beginning of Islam was allowed, and later on he was allowed. The second way the ulama look at it, they try to combine. And they give different reasons within this. So one was on the same page, one was whilst the Quran being revealed, and so on. They try to combine and give different reasons. And the third way is that they say that hadith which prohibits isn't actually a hadith. It's actually a statement of our companion. And it's not a statement of the Prophet ﷺ. But that which is the strongest is the first type. In the beginning of Islam it wasn't allowed, and later on it was permissible once people got used to how the Quran spoke and how the Prophet spoke, and so on. Right. Can we right? Name some of the reasons why people fabricate hadith.
One of the reasons was fame, for popularity.
Fame, popularity.
Another reason was for money.
Money.
Another reason was to call to the innovation.
Call to innovation. You have political views, and you also have in the name of religion. So not innovation, but just comparing the worship, then they make up a hadith to just follow. Okay. Then what are the benefits of traveling to seek knowledge?
The scholars can spread knowledge, or they can go to seek knowledge.
Okay.
You can meet the scholars of hadith. Meet other scholars of hadith.
I mean, you summarize it, it says seek knowledge, but we give a lot more detail, such as show the chain,
learn more.
authenticate, learn about the narrators, revise knowledge with others, and so on. Okay, alright. And last question, who's answered? Or have you answered? No, right. Explain, just summarize the compilation of hadith by Imam Zuhri. What do we say about it? Last week. Right. Some have narrated that Abu Bakr compiled some hadith and then he burnt them later on. Is that correct?
It's not correct.
Not correct. What do you mean by not correct?
It's not authentic.
Not authentic. But over Umar.
He planned to write down hadith, and he sought advice from the Sahaba. But then he didn't want them the hadith to be taken and the Quran for that.
Good. So Umar wanted to ask the Sahaba. Sahaba said, yeah, do it, but then he didn't want to. He didn't want to take people away from the Quran, so he didn't do it. Okay. And then was the next person who wanted to do it Umar ibn Abdul Aziz? Yes or no? Put your hand where you say yes. This was all three of you nods. Put your hand on one. You three. Who else said yeah?
I've changed my mind.
You changed your mind, why?
I think it was his father, isn't it?
Good, yeah. His father wanted to as well. But we don't know if, it's not reached us, so we don't know if he can do that. Okay, then he was Umar ibn Aziz, and he told, one was Imam Zuhri, there's another one as well. Who knows?
Muhammad ibn Amr ibn Hazm.
Ibn Hazm, okay. Now, Imam Zuhri compiled. Did Imam Zuhri compiled one book?
No. It was whilst the books were being collected, they sent it out to the places where the leaders were.
Very good. Right, okay. Alhamdulillah, we're going to start day number 4. Now, for day number 4, I changed a few things and added a few things. And even in the beginning, I changed a few things. So what I've done in the group, I don't know if you saw tomorrow, I sent a new worksheet. In terms of what we've already taken, no real changes, just some small changes. But for day number 4, I made a few changes, which can be found in the Telegram group. No. Okay. Yeah, so we're on day 4 now. Okay. Alhamdulillah.
Ustadh, I have the sheets printed from before, so should I change it and have the new ones?
The one, up to what we've taken, you don't need to. You don't need to.
For the new ones?
For the new ones, yeah, correct. We need a copy, yeah. If you've not taken a new copy, for day 4, take one, inshallah. Because I've added a lot of stuff. If you need stapler, you've got a stapler as well. If you want to stapler.
At the end.
Okay, that's fine. Thank you. I mean, it's not that many differences. There's just a few things that maybe one, two cases I like. Okay, so alhamdulillah, we have finished the first century of going through the history of documentation of hadith. We talked about time of Sahaba and the Tabi'een and how Imam Zuhri compiled hadith and so on. We're going to start now with the 2nd and 3rd century. And this is where we're going to speak about a lot of the books also.
I think it's back.
So we're going to start off with the introduction into the 2nd century. Now the 2nd century starts off with 2 types of people. So which type of people are living at this time? In the 2nd century, we have the younger Tabi'een. So as you know, so the Tabi'een came towards the end of the 1st century. So beginning of the 2nd century, we had the younger Tabi'een. And some of the elders are still alive, of course, but you know, there were a lot of, throughout the 2nd century, not talking about just the beginning, but throughout the 2nd century, mainly the younger Tabi'een, and also the Atba' Tabi'een, the students of the Tabi'een. Right? So you can see that by the end of the 1st century, the time of Sahaba came to an end. And the last companion, from the last companion is Anas radiallahu anhu. I think he passed away 91 after Hijrah. But there was another companion who passed away, I believe he was Abu Tufayl radiallahu anhu. I think he passed away 110. That's not what I can remember. But somebody reminds me later, I'll double check for you, inshallah. But that's one question. Who the last companion passed away? A lot of people say Anas. From the most famous one to Anas radiallahu anhu. I think he passed away 91 after Hijrah at the age of 101 or something like that. But the last companion to actually pass away was Abu Tufayl radiallahu anhu, passed away 110. From what I can remember, but I will try to double check for you guys, inshallah.
Is that Abu Tufayl?
Abu Tufayl, Alif Allah. Okay, join it, Abu Tufayl.
And you?
I think 110.
Is that to feel the people of Dorse, is it? Is that the same one? Is that different?
It's a different person. His name was Abu Tufayl. Also in the 2nd century, a lot more Ahl Bid'ah, people of innovation started to appear. So this is a big difference from the 1st century and the 2nd. The first century, in the beginning, there weren't any, and then during the time of Uthman radiallahu anhu, they started to slowly appear. But in the second century, there were a lot more. In the second century, there were a lot more. And many of the major scholars of Islam and Hadith were there in the second century as well. Because we are still within the time of the Salaf. When we say Salaf, it is referring to the first three golden generations, who are the Sahaba, Tabi'in, and Atba'a Tabi'in. So we're still in those generations, in the second century. So you had the likes of Imam Malik, Imam Shafi'i, Imam Al-Awza'i, Shu'bah ibn Hajjaj, whose story we mentioned last week of, in traveling. Abdullah ibn Mubarak. When did you pass away, the numbers?
81.
181. 181, yeah. Maybe he was born in? 118. 118, yeah. Sufyan ibn Uyayna. These names, try to write down. These are names that you should know. If you've not heard of these names, write them down. So I said Imam Malik, Imam Shafi'i, Sufyan al-Thawri, Imam al-Awza'i. These scholars are major scholars you should know. Imam, you know how we have the four madhahib? Imam al-Awza'i had his own madhab. Imam al-Awza'i had his own madhab. But as time went on, because he had less students and so on, that madhab kind of just fizzled out. Okay? By the time he had his own opinions, and he had his own madhab. Okay? Because he was at that level. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala chose the four main Imams for their madhab to remain and so on. And there are many reasons for that. Sometimes it's political, or sometimes it's, whichever, the Khalifa, whatever madhab he's following, people follow that. Sometimes it's the number of students. Like for example, Imam Ahmed, he never wrote a book in fiqh. So one of the main madhabs of Imam Ahmed, right? He never wrote a book in fiqh. But he had so many students that all wrote down his madhab. Abu Dawood was his student, his son Abdullah and Salih were his students, and so many others. So whenever they would ask Imam Ahmed 50 questions, they would write them down and write down the answers. And his method was spread like that. So I mentioned Imam Malik, Imam Shafi'i, Sufyan al-Thawri, Imam al-Awza'i, Shu'bah ibn Hajjaj, whose story we mentioned last week. Shu'bah ibn Hajjaj, Abdullah ibn Mubarak, Sufyan ibn Uyayna, Abdurrahman ibn Mahdi, Waqi' ibn al-Jarrah. Anyone heard of Waqi'? You might have heard of him. Where have you heard him from?
About the poem.
The one with? Who?
I think Shafa'u to
Who says that?
Imam Shafi'i.
Imam Shafi'i, very good. So Waqi', the teacher of Imam Shafi'i, is a famous poem and incident of Imam Shafi'i, where Imam Shafi'i basically had photographic memory. So much so that he said that when he would read, he would have to cover one page, otherwise he'd end up writing 2 pages and it gets mixed up. But then he found that his memory became weaker, and maybe he could have memorized. Instead of looking at things once or twice, he had to look at it 4 or 5 times. He found it weaker. So he goes to his teacher, and he mentions this in lines of poetry. Imam Shafi'i says, "Shakawtu ila waki'in su'a hifzi." I complained to Waqi' ibn Jarrah, rahimahullah, about su'a hifzi, regarding the weakness of my memory. فَأَرْشَدَنِي إِلَى تَرْكِ الْمَعَاصِي. So he guided me to leaving of sins. And he told me, your memory's got weaker because you sinned. And some have narrated that one day Imam Shafi'i was walking, and he heard, and it's called anklet, women that wear like a bracelet on their ankles. So he heard something like that, so he looked. And he saw the ankle of a woman, and then he looked away straight away. Okay, but if still a look was there, and that was the closest memory to become a bit weaker. So he says, "Shakawtu ila waki'in su'a hifzi, fa'arshadani ila tarki al-ma'asi." I complained to Waqi' regarding the weakness of my memory, so he guided me towards leaving of sins. وقال, and then he said, "Inna al-ilma nurun." The verily knowledge is a light. وَنُورُ اللَّهِ لَا يُؤْتَى لِعَاصٍ. And the light of Allah is not given to a sinner. So that within there is a reminder for us to leave leaving of sins. And the whole objective of seeking knowledge, learning about Islam, is not so that we can narrate. No, we're learning about hadith, right? We're learning about chains of narrations and so on. Ibn Mas'ud says, ليس العلم بكثرة الرواية ولكن العلم الخشية. Knowledge is not كثرة الرواية. It is not memorizing a lot of different narrations and narrating and saying person said this, person said this, person. That's not knowledge. ولكن العلم الخشية. Knowledge is having the fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Knowledge is that which allows you to get closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So learning and memorizing this hadith is actually a means for you to get closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You memorize this, you learn what the Prophet said, so that you can implement it and get closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that's why it's very, very important that we remember that objective in our minds. Is that the objective of seeking knowledge is not memorizing and having data or information, but knowledge is that which benefits. And that's why from du'as of the Prophet ﷺ, oh Allah, we ask you, Allah, inna na'udhu bika min ilmin la yanfa'. Oh Allah, we seek refuge from you, from that knowledge, la yanfa', which is not beneficial. And the du'a, Allahumma inna nas'aluka ilman nafi'a. Oh Allah, we ask you the beneficial knowledge. We seek refuge from that knowledge which is not beneficial, and we ask you for that knowledge which is beneficial. Ibn Qayyim rahimahullah says, من عرف الله بأسمائه وصفاته وأفعاله أحبه لا محالة. Whoever knows Allah with His names and attributes and His actions, then he will love Allah, there's no doubt in that. So a lot of people want to learn Tawheed and Aqidah and so on, and then they want to refute. The first thing that this knowledge should do, it shall reflect in your heart. So you learn about Allah's names and attributes, Ibn Qayyim says, you should love Allah, there's no doubt in that. So if you learn about Aqidah and Tawheed, but then you're not loving Allah, you find that there's deficiency in that, then know there's a deficiency in you, either in your knowledge, either in the way that you've learnt, but there's a deficiency somewhere. Somewhere ulama said, Man kana lillahi a'raf, kana minhu akhwaf, wa li'ibadatihi atlab, wa an ma'asutihi ab'ad. Whoever has more knowledge of Allah, he has more fear of Allah. And he is more eager to do the obedience of Allah, and he is further away from the disobedience of Allah. So knowledge should make you a person like that. And that's what Ashab the Salaf were. The Salaf, if you find their speech, he spoke very, very little, but the knowledge was a lot. I think Hamdan al-Qassar, rahimahullah, he was asked, مَا بَالُ كَلَامِ السَّلَفِ أَنْفَعُ? That why is the speech of the Salaf more beneficial, even though they spoke less? And he said, because the Salaf used to speak for, I can't remember the exact wording, but something along the lines of, for the salvation of mankind, and to save themselves from the hellfire, and to benefit the people. Whereas us, we speak لِعِزَّةِ النَّفْسِ, to show honor for ourselves, I can speak and I got more knowledge and so on. Ibn Rajab rahimahullah, one day he was teaching the students in a gathering like this, and an issue came, and he went into depth in that issue, mentioned all of the issues, and answered all of the questions and so on. Then later on, he had a gathering with some of the umara, some of the kings and princes and other scholars and so on. And that same issue he spoke about in the morning, that same issue came up. Then he didn't speak, he didn't say anything. So afterwards, his students went up to him and said, you just taught that today. Why didn't you mention everything that you mentioned? You could have just, answered that question and sorted out all the issues that everybody had. And you just did it in the morning, so it's not like something happened a year ago, you might have forgotten it to look over your notes. You just did it today. And he said, when I taught you, that's what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did. But if I spoke then that would mean for the people, that would just show off to the kings and princes that got knowledge. So subhanAllah, it's a reminder for ourselves that, to remember the objective of knowledge. We talk about learning, we talk about sometimes how to learn, what's the best way to learn and revise and so on. But always remember the objective, which is to get closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Prophet said, مَنْ سَلَكَ طَرِيقًا يَلْتَمِسُ فِيهِ عِلْمًا سَهَّلَ اللَّهُ لَهُ بِهِ طَرِيقًا إِلَى الْجَنَّةِ. Whoever treads upon a path of seeking knowledge, Allah will make this path to Jannah easy for him. Our objective is Jannah. Our objective is to get close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So if we lose track of that objective and we start to think about other things from showing off or learning just for this, or just so you can win an argument, or just so you can refute a certain person. If that is only our intention, then we won't be able to reach our destination and our objective, which is Jannah. Anyways, these names that I mentioned are some of the, there's many other ulama as well, but these are some of the, from some of the famous names, and these are names that every single person should know. Okay? And as time goes on, the more you learn, these names will become more familiar, but it's good to have these names. Another thing in the second century is the difference between tadween and tasnif became apparent. The difference between tadween and tasnif.
Say again.
The difference between tadween and tasnif. Tadween and tasnif. Tasnif. Tadween and tasnif. What do these two words mean? Tadween, and the reason I mention this name is because right at the beginning when I mentioned some of the books that I used, one of them is called Tadween al-Sunnah. And the science normally that we're studying, the name of the science is normally called Tadween al-Sunnah. They both mean to write down or to document and so on, but there's a slight difference between the two. Tadween just means to compile. It means just to compile and to write. But tasnif is to do that, but to do it in an order, to do it in chapters, to do it in a certain order, to place something first and something later, and not just compiling. So that's what became more apparent. In the first century, there wasn't much tadween, there wasn't much tasnif, it was just tadween, just compiling, writing all the Prophet said. But in the second century, no, it became more ordering. Sometimes there are books on the chapters of fiqh, sometimes on the name of the Sahaba, sometimes like this. We'll take the different types of books.
What was tasnif again, sorry?
So tasnif is compiling by order. And that order differs. So some ulama did it in terms of names, some did it in terms of chapters. We'll explain some of the different types of books, inshallah. Another thing which started in the second century, which wasn't as prevalent in the first, is not only were they compiling the statements of the Prophet ﷺ, but now they were also writing the statements of the Sahaba and the Tabi'in. The statements of the Sahaba and the Tabi'in. And the final point regarding the second century is that the scrolls and parchments of the Sahaba and Tabi'in, they were being added into the bigger books. They were being added into the bigger books. Okay, if you look on the next page, it says people who compiled books in this century. Now, I made it easier. I know sometimes names are too much and you're not familiar, so I've written down all the names for you. These are some of the, in this century, in the second century, some of the common or more famous ulama who compiled hadith. So we have Ibn Jurayj, we have Ma'mar, Abu Ammar, Abdurrahman, Ibn Amr al-Awza'i, this is al-Awza'i that we talked about. شعبة بن الحجاج, سفيان الثوري, الليث بن سعد, حماد بن سلمة, إمام مالك, عبد الله بن مبارك, سفيان بن عيينة, وكيع بن الجراح, عبد الله بن وهب, محمد بن إدريس الشافعي, and عبد الرزاق بن الصنعاني. Okay, these are maybe some of the more famous names. We'll take some of them, all of them. Imam Malik will take Shafi'i. No, we won't take the Shafi'i in our book. In what we're going to talk about. Abdul Razak, he wrote a book that we'll take. And so these are some of the main names from this century. Okay, after that, so this is basically all part of the introduction into the second century. Now after this, there's something that I added, is talking about the importance of the methodology of muhaddithin in their books. So now what we're going to do is, we are going to give a small introduction into generally the methodology of ulama when it comes to writing their books. Okay? And the book that I'm using for this, before I was using different books, but the reason I've given you a new I've added new stuff is because I'm using this book, and this book is called Al-Mu'in fi Ma'rifati Manahij al-Muhaddithin. And this is written by Shaykh Khalid al-Rabbani, who only passed away a few months ago. Rahimahullah. He was one of our teachers in the university. He taught me Jami' al-Tirmidhi, parts of it. And a lot of the students who came before me, in the Arabic Institute, he used to be there all the time, so he used to help a lot of students. And may Allah have mercy upon him. And I think he also was a supervisor for Medina.com. You know, Ustadh Abdul Naveed, his website, Medina.com. He's one of the main supervisors for that as well. And he was into hadith, so he's written a number of books that came out just before he passed away actually. From them this book, Al-Mu'in fi Ma'rifat Manahij al-Muhaddithin. Al-Mu'in, the helper in Ma'rifah, in knowing the methodologies of the Muhaddithin. So, so this is a book just talking about the methodologies of the Muhaddithin, so I thought I'll use this inshallah. And the first thing that it says here is knowing the importance of the methodology of the Muhaddithin in their books. So before we even talk about them, the first thing we're going to talk about is the importance of why should we study. Why should we study the methodology of the Muhaddithin? Imam Malik al-Muwatta, why are we studying his book and how he's written it and what he's done? Why are we studying Bukhari and how he's written it? Why don't we study the hadith itself? Yeah? For a number of reasons. The first reason is you learn the academic precision of the scholars of hadith. You learn the academic precision of the scholars of hadith. Because the way they wrote those books, they weren't just random ways that they had written their books, but it had a structure, it had an author, it had an order. And even some of the most precise details they would look into and they would differentiate. If one person said حدثنا, another person أخبرنا, which basically means the same thing, but Imam Muslim, for example, would differentiate between them. He would consider them two different hadith. Some ulama have written in a certain way. Imam Bukhari, for example, he's written a chapter heading and he mentions specific hadith in that chapter, but there's a reason for that. And this is known as Fiqh al-Bukhari fi Tarajim, which we'll talk about. The Fiqh al-Bukhari in his chapter headings. Just in the way he's written his chapter headings, there's so much knowledge. Ulama have written books just on this. They've written books just on the Fiqh al-Bukhari in his chapter headings. That's what it's titled. And they look at why is it titled this, and why is it mentioning this hadith in this place, and they look into all of that. Even something like that. So, that is the first benefit. And this is something also, right now we're going to study most of them theoretically. That this Imam did this Imam did this, and he did this. But it's also important to do it practically as well. Meaning, once you've studied the methodologies, so if you study Imam Bukhari did this and that, it's important to also maybe pick up Sahih Bukhari and go through that as well. And try to see, okay, this hadith, look, Imam Bukhari did this and he did this, that was his methodology. Whereas Imam Muslim, his methodology was different, he wouldn't do it like this. So doing it practically is important as well. Maybe inshallah we can do it in the future. We'll do that in the future. That can be an idea for one of our future lessons inshallah. That's what we did in Jamia Islamiyya in Medina. We didn't, I was in Faculty of Sharia, we didn't study all the 6 books of hadith, meaning every single hadith in there. That would take them too long. Even Faculty of Hadith got nothing to do with all 6 books in the faculty. People try to do it, if you want to do it, try to find a scholar outside and do it outside. But what we did was every semester we did Bukhari, for example. One semester we did Bukhari. And in there, it was more selected hadith. So we did first few weeks, talk about Imam Bukhari, his methodology, how he wrote. And then the actual syllabus was 125 hadith. From Sahih Bukhari, the teachers, they selected 125 hadith, and we studied those 125 hadith. And we tried to apply the methodology. Then the next semester, Muslim. The next semester, Abu Dawud and Tirmidhi, and so on. So I think it's important. Inshallah, we can do that in the future. From the benefits also is that you learn fiqh. You learn fiqh as well. So fiqh, for those that don't know, simply is the science of the practical Islamic rulings. So practically, salah, how to pray, zakat, fasting, hajj, buying and selling, marriage, divorce, transactions. This is known as the science of fiqh. So that which is more theory-based, in terms of your beliefs, that's called aqidah. And that which is more practical is practical physical actions that you do, that's fiqh. So you learn fiqh because you learn hadith, because fiqh is built on, one of the main sources is hadith. And also, the way the ulama have structured it, you learn fiqh. So for example, they will have maybe structured, will have placed the most authentic hadith first, and then the weaker hadith later. So that you learn that this is authentic and that is weak, and then you act upon that which is authentic and you don't act upon that which is weak. I mean, that's not always the case. Just because something is weak doesn't mean just throw it to the side. There's more rulings, but just in simple terms like that. Also, there are chapters that regarding certain hadith, that this is nasikh, and then another chapter is what is mansukh. They'll mention which ahadith are acted upon and which ahadith are abrogated. The ulama look into that. Because the ulama look into when is this hadith narrated, when is this narrated, and so on, and they can also work out what is abrogated and what is not. And other things as well. So from these hadith books, if you know the methodology, you can learn fiqh from that. For example, the same example as we gave before, fiqh al-Bukhari in his chapter headings. You learn what are the fiqh opinions of Imam Bukhari in that. From the benefits as well is you understand the objectives of the muhaddithin and why they have written their books. So you know the objectives why they have written their books. If you just pick up a book and you see certain hadith, you might think to yourself, why is he written this? You see a weak hadith, why is it such a great alim, great hadith, why did he put a weak hadith in there? Just because a weak hadith is in there, that's not necessarily a deficiency in the book. He's got a certain objective and a reason, then you understand why. Maybe we give the example of the book of Mawdu'at of Ibn al-Jawzi, if you remember. That book is just full of fabricated hadith. Now, you must say, how can a big imam, such a great imam, have a book and all of them are fabricated? Does he not know? He has an objective, which is to compile those hadiths which were fabricated, so a person knows that these are fabricated and don't act upon these. From the benefits also is that it connects you to the sources of the religion. By learning the science, it's connecting you to the sources of the religion. Because from the main sources of the religion is hadith. As these books are those books which have collected those hadith. Also, this is number 5 now, right? You learn and you're able to appreciate the efforts and the hard work that the ulama went through to compile these books. For example, we're going to take today, inshallah, the Muwatta Imam Malik, he says it himself. He says himself that it took him 40 years to compile that book. 40 years.
Able to appreciate the efforts of
The scholars who compiled these books. Imam Bukhari, for example, he had memorized about 600,000 hadith. Sahih Bukhari only has about, like I said to you before, the Kutub Sittah generally you can average out to about 5,000. We'll mention the exact number later, inshallah. And also last week when I talked about, take it out, turn it off now. Last week I mentioned Imam Muslim, where he mentioned the statement Yahya ibn Abi Kathir, that you cannot attain knowledge with the containment of the body, right? And then I remember I mentioned why he mentioned it, because he gathered all these different narrations of one hadith. He's telling you that listen, I have to travel and work hard for you guys to do that hadith. Number 6 is that it shows us the status of the muhaddithin. Not only do we acknowledge their hard effort, it shows their status. When you learn how they've written these books and what they've gone through and which ulama have praised this book and which ulama have explained these books, then it shows you the high level and the status of these great scholars. Another benefit is that it helps you when it comes to research. That's number 7. No, number 7. It helps you as a student when it comes to research. For example, if I give you a research to search for the statements of the Sahaba when it comes to this particular issue. Right? If you don't know which books contain the statements of the Sahaba, you wouldn't know what to do. Maybe at best is to Google search and that's it. But if you know, for example, that these certain books contain the statements of the Sahaba, these just the hadith of Prophet ﷺ. You want the statements only in fiqh issues, right? Or you want a hadith but just fiqh issues, then these are the books that we go to and so on. Once you know that, you know how to search. And that reminds me that there's a homework as well, which was a search statement of the ulama regarding high sanad. Put your hand if you found something. 1, 2. You found it, class, you found it. Okay, I know a lot of you were trying and couldn't find anything. Right, what did you find?
I mentioned all of them.
How many did you find?
Quite a lot.
How many did you find?
Only a few.
Only a few. You right now?
Yeah.
Plus, mention what you found.
So, more is about the importance of the isnad itself. So to begin with, I'll find the statement,
Okay.
why is this important?
Okay.
So one was from Abu Ali al-Jubair and from Ibn Hazm, and they basically, both of them were saying that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala privileged the Ummah of Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam by having this isnad, because it wasn't there for the nations before.
Good. That links to what Shaykh al-Islam said as well, that the isnad is something specific to this religion. The other religions don't have. I think we mentioned that one in class, but it's similar now.
And then basically, then this on Google, by the way.
Sorry?
This on Google, by the way.
Okay.
It's a Ulu al-Isnad, and that's like most of the scholars at the time, they saw this as a badge of honor to get like badge of honor to get to short narrations or shorter narrations.
That's good. Remember, last week I was saying that they used to, not show off, but I think that's better, badge of honor.
And Ibn al-Salah, in his book Al-Muqaddimah, he said, going for this shorter chain of narration pushes away mistakes from the chain, since each narrator can commit a possible mistake, whether intentionally or unintentionally. The less mistakes there are, the fewer the number of narrators, the less chances are there of these mistakes. And the final one was Khatib al-Baghdadi. He describes the hardship that the scholars used to endure to get to the highest chains. So this, to me, this is my opinion, was to show that if the scholars went through these hardships, why did they go through these hardships? If they wanted, if it was just to, that's the logic for explaining it. Why would they go through these hardships just to verify the hadith or to get to a shorter chain? There must be some ajr in it.
Good. Excellent. Very good. Khalid. No, Khalid. Tanzil.
Let's mention the statements.
Well, don't mention the ones regarding isnad. It's ulul isnad, high isnad, or a short chain narration. Yeah?
So, Muhammad ibn Aslam al-Tusi said, the nearness of the chain of transmission is the closeness to Allah the Almighty. And this is mentioned in Al-Jami al-Akhlaq al-Rawi wa Adab al-Sami.
That's good. He says, Qurb al-Isnadi, Qurbun. So it's a nice statement. In Arabic, he's saying was Qurb al-Isnadi, Qurbun, or Qurbatun. Qurb al-Isnad, being close to the Isnad, having a short one, is Qurb to Allah, Qurbat to Allah, being close to Allah. So he's used like the same words. In Arabic, it sounds nice. No.
Harb ibn Ismail said, Ahmed al-Asjaba, a man seeking the highest chain of transmission, he said, The high chain of transmission is the sunnah from the Salaf, because the companions of Abdullah used to travel from Kufa to Medina learning from Umar.
Yeah, we mentioned that in class as well. The students of Ibn Mas'ud, if they had a hadith from Umar, they wouldn't suffice with just listening to Ibn Mas'ud, but they would travel to Umar to hear it directly from him. Correct?
It was said to Yahya ibn Ma'in during his illness which he died from, what do you desire? And if he wanted, he would have said the highest
Is that
level.
where you're reading it from?
Yeah.
Okay, so
The highest level in paradise, but he said an empty house and a high chain of narration.
yes, that one is one that makes you smile. He was asked on his deathbed, "Ma tashtahi? What do you want? What is that thing that you desire?" He said, "Bayt al-Khalid wa was it Sanad al-Ali? Wa Isnad al-Ali." He said, "Only thing I want in life is a free house, just me by myself, no one to disturb me, just me and my books. Or Isnad al-Ali and a high chain. That's the things I desire in life."
Which is mentioned in the book by Ibn Kathir, Al-Bahith al-Hathith fi ikhtisar al-ulum al-hadith. For this reason, the desires of many critical Imams and eminent scholars fell on the journey to the poles of the country seeking for a higher chain of transmission. Although some ignorant people from among the worshippers were prevented from permitting the journey.
Who said that?
He says it's mentioned in Ibn Kathir's book.
Okay, Ibn Kathir mentioned it now.
Al-Bahith al-Hathith.
Yeah, Al-Bahith al-Hadith. It's a book that you study Mustalah Hadith between, after Nukhbat al-Fikr, but before al-Fiqh al-Iraqi or al-Fiqh al-Sunni. Okay, Hassan. Have you got them in English or in Arabic?
I've got the Arabic as well.
Yeah. After the lesson, what to do? Send them me. And I'll send you in 2 groups so everyone's going to write down as well, inshallah. Okay. This exercise is good because there are a lot of people who couldn't find something. It's good because
in Arabic you could find it.
in Arabic you can find it, in English it's a lot harder. First it shows the importance of Arabic. Learning Arabic. You couldn't find it in English. I mean, then there's other issues. If you do find it in English, can you trust that translation? There's other issues as well. So that's one thing, the importance of learning Arabic. And the second is also research. It's good. What I might try to do is give you guys more things to search. Because the more you search, it's a skill. So you know how to search, where to search, what books to go to. Like we mentioned just now. Sometimes websites are very beneficial. Which websites can you use, which websites can't you use, and so on. Okay, let's carry on, inshallah. What is number 11? Number 8. Number 8 is, now this is a bit more specific for hadith, but you learn the different ways of tahammul and ada. Tahammul and ada. This is more mustalah hadith. I'm not going to explain this too much, but those that know, tahammul is referring to when a student hears the hadith. When he hears the hadith, and ada is when he narrates the hadith. Tahammul is when he hears the hadith. Ada is when he narrates it. So you learn about how to hear from a shaykh and how to narrate and what the rulings. You learn that as well.
What was the second one?
Tahammul, ada. Ada. Number 9, you learn the different ways of doing takhrij of hadith. Takhrij is basically when a person looks into hadith, references it, looks at the authenticity of it, looks at the narrators in it, and all of that. If you know the methodology of the scholars in the writing their books, then this becomes a lot easier to know, to do that takhrij. And lastly, is by knowing the methodology of the scholars, number 10. Knowing them.
What does tahrij mean again?
Takhrij is referencing the hadith, authenticating the hadith, looking at the narrators in the hadith, all of that. You know, sometimes if you look at books and in the footnotes, there's like so much writing about the hadith. It's more in Arabic, you don't really see in English. In English, it's just Sahih Bukhari and that's it. But in the Arabic books, you'll see that this hadith is mentioned and they mention all of the different narrators. Okay, it's in Bukhari with this narration. It's in Abu Dawud, this chain narration, it's in Tirmidhi with this chain narration. And then they start talking about the people in the chain and who's authentic, who's not. All of that is considered takhrij. So takhrij is quite a big word and it includes all of that. Okay, number 10, sorry, is that by learning the methodology of the scholars, it allows you to refute misconceptions about some of the Imams. Misconceptions about some of the Imams. And for example, we're going to learn Abu Dawood, rahimahullah. In his Sunan, sometimes he has weak hadith. Not fabricated or anything, but he has weak hadith. Some may think, oh, great Imam, why is he putting weak hadith in there? But if you know why he's done it, then it removes that misconception, which is he says himself, which we're going to get to in a second, but he says himself that my objective, and it's linked to the other point of the objective, but my objective is to compile those hadith pertaining to fiqh, pertaining to the fiqh rulings. And in each chapter, I will mention the most authentic hadith regarding that issue. The most authentic, meaning, not necessarily it has to be authentic, but the most authentic. So if there's no authentic hadith at all, then I'll put the weak hadith, at least it's something, better than nothing. Right? In a sense. So if you understand that, you say, okay, that's why he's put it. Because there's no authentic hadith, it's just, this is the only hadith that's there. So because it's weak, the weak has different levels, it's not fabricated. Just a little bit weak. Maybe one person in the chain had weak memory. That's it. Yeah? So he's put it there. So, and then fiqh comes into, but if you have one issue, you don't know what to do at all, and there's a weak hadith, then the ulama differ. Some say you have to point it, some say no, and some say, but at least he's put it there for that reason, for the people that want to do fiqh to look into, and they can decide whether to have to point it or not.
Could you please repeat the statement of Abu Dawood?
Yeah, it's not word for word, the statement. But he mentions that when he's written his book, his objective is to compile the most authentic hadith in each chapter, in the chapters of fiqh, basically. Inshallah, once you get to Abu Dawood and talk about his book, we'll be more precise with the statement, inshallah. This is generally, inshallah. Okay, so these are 10 points to show the importance of why we should learn these things. Now, for you guys, generally, I know some of you, mashallah, have been studying for a while. Some of you, this class might be the first class you're probably attending. If it's your first class that you're attending, or you're in the beginning stage of seeking knowledge, the minimum all you would need from our explanations when you go through all of the books is just to know, okay, first in Muwatta Imam Malik, all you should know is what does the word Muwatta mean and refer to, and the status of the book, and that's about it. And a bit about the Imam, that's it. As for a bit more details of he did it like this, and he wrote like this, and he wrote like this, and that is for the other students that might have, who are already familiar with these names and already know a bit about that and want more information. What we'll mention, not the most detail ever, I'll try to keep it in the middle, inshallah, so that for those that know, they can benefit, and those who don't know and it's their first time studying, then at least they can focus on the most important issues, and it's written for them, so that in the future when they learn more and when they go back to their notes regarding this book, then the notes are already there, inshallah. Right, the next thing is ways of knowing their methodology. So we're talking about the methodology. How do we know the methodology? There's a number of different ways. How can we work out the methodology? The first way is that they themselves mention it. The authors themselves mention it. The authors themselves mention it. So for example, I'll give you two examples. Imam Muslim. Imam Muslim, in Sahih Muslim, he has an introduction. He's written an introduction before starting the book. In there, he mentions a lot. He mentions why he wrote the book and the importance of the authentic hadith and so on. So he mentions a lot of his methodology in the introduction. Secondly, Imam Abu Dawud. Abu Dawud, he's got a book titled Risala. It's titled Risalatu Abi Dawud ila Ahli Makkah. Risalatu Abi Dawud ila Ahli Makkah. This is the second example. The first one was the introduction of a Muslim to his Sahih. So he's got Sahih Muslim, in the Sahih Muslim he's got introduction in there. The second is Risalatu Abi Dawood ila Ahli Makkah. The letter of Abu Dawood to the people of Makkah. The letter of Abu Dawood to the people of Makkah. Basically, he wrote his book As-Sunan, and the people of Makkah were asking questions about it. So he wrote a letter talking about As-Sunan, and he talked about his objective and what he's done there and so on. So he's written in there, he's basically written his methodology in there. So when we talk about Abu Dawood's book, we'll be quoting from there a lot because he explained it himself. And the best person to explain a book is the author himself. Yeah? So the best explanation of a book is the author himself. So he's saying that I've written this for this reason. Nobody can come around later and say, no, he did it for a different reason. Yeah. He's telling you the reason. That's why in tafsir, the best way to do tafsir is known as tafsir al-Quran bil-Quran. That you explain the Quran with the Quran. For example, Allah says, وَالسَّمَاءِ وَالطَّارِقِ وَمَا أَدْرَاكَ مَا طَارِقُ. Okay, what does الطارق? What does that word mean? Allah mentioned the third ayat, النجم الثاقب. Okay? Which means, you guys can go back and you can look this up inshallah. Okay? And so many times in the Quran. For example, صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم. The path of those whom Allah, you have bestowed your mercy, your blessing upon. Who are these people? Who is Allah referring to? In different ayat. Whoever obeys Allah and His Messenger, then they are with those who Allah has bestowed His mercy or His blessing upon. من النبيين والصديقين والشهداء والصالحين. And He mentions them from the prophets and the truthful and the martyrs and the pious. So in Surah Fatiha, who are the people who Allah has bestowed His mercy upon? Allah mentioned in different ayat. The prophets, the martyrs, the truthful and the pious. Yeah? This is called tafsir al-Quran bil-Quran. Sometimes a scholar could be wrong in applying it, meaning sometimes he can say this ayah explains this ayah. He might be wrong in connecting the two ayah together. That could take place. Okay, that's important to know as well. But generally, the point that I was making is the best person to explain a book is the author himself. Ibn Hajar has got Nukhbat al-Fikr. Then he's got an explanation called Nuzhat al-Nazar. He explains his own book. So, person wants to understand Nukhbat al-Fikr, he has to understand Nuzhat al-Nazar as well. He has to go through that, inshallah, to properly understand it. The second way of knowing is through the explanations of that book. The explanations of that book. Okay, and this is of two types. So you can make these two different points, or you can make it one point. Okay. In the explanations, either like Ibn Hajar explained Bukhari, Fath al-Bari, I think 15, 20 volumes, I can't remember how many. Imam Nawawi explains Sahih Muslim and so on. So in these books, either the explainer, the person explaining, he quotes the Imams himself from other books. So he'll say that in this place Imam Bukhari said this, and in this place Imam Muslim said this. So he quotes the Imams themselves. He quotes the Imams themselves, but from different places. And he gathers kind of that to tell you what the methodology is. Or, and you can make this point number 3 if you want, or the explainer, he himself, after him being a scholar and studying the book and teaching the book, he himself deduces the methodology. He himself deduces the methodology. So he's obviously studied the whole book and in depth and so on. So he's realized that whenever this happens, this is the case. And this is a common theme in the book, and this and this. So he realizes and he works out that this is the methodology. So you can learn the methodology by going to the explanations of the books. And lastly is going to those books that specifically talk about the methodology of the scholars. Specifically talk about the methodology of the scholars. So the fourth is going to those books. Number 4, going to those books that specifically talk about the methodology of the scholars. So you don't go to the explanation of a certain book, but you go to those books that talk about the methodology of the scholars. Okay? many of the early scholars have written books like this. Ibn Mandah, he has a book called Shurutul A'imah, the conditions of the Imams. That's Ibn Mandah. Ibn Tahir al-Qaysarani, he has a book called Shurutul A'immat al-Sittah, the conditions of the 6 Imams, and so on. And there are many, now, especially for master's thesis and PhD theses, many people have written topics just on this. And from those books is, if you want to know the methodology, is this book, Al-Mu'in fi Ma'arifat Manhaj al-Muhaddithin. However, it's a new book, it's only in Arabic at the moment. Inshallah, it may get translated into English in the future. Inshallah. Okay, we're going to talk about now the different types of methodology. Now, what I mean by different types of methodology, there's two that we're going to mention. One is general, and the other is specific. What we mean by general is generally all of the muhaddithin, they have certain things that is consistent and common in all of their methodologies.
So what was that?
First is general,
Specific.
and the other specific, yeah. So what I mean by general is that generally all of the scholars of hadith, generally, they had certain things which were common in all of their books. And specific, we're not going to talk about specific. Why? But not now anyway. Because what I mean by specific is specific ways of writing. Each Imam had their own way of writing. And that's what we're going to go through. So when you go through, I wanted to do it today, but I don't think we'll get time. So this will be the last point, inshallah. But next lesson in the beginning, when we take Muwatta Imam Malik, we'll talk about, Imam Malik, he wrote in this way, and he had a specific way of writing. Imam Bukhari had a specific way of writing. Imam Muslim had a specific way of writing, and so on. So that is specific. But today, we'll just finish off by talking about, and mentioning some of the general points of how the Muhaddithun wrote their books. The first point, so this is under the general. So under the general way, we're going to mention some of the general points of how the Muhaddithun wrote their books. Okay? So you can just write it underneath in general. Yeah? The first point I mentioned is that they did not do ikthar. Ikthar meaning basically going overboard in narrating number of hadith. They did not go overboard in narrating number of hadith. Rather, they would just mention that amount which is needed. So, what this point is basically saying is that the Imams, generally, the reason of writing wasn't, let me write down every single thing that I know. Okay? Imam Ahmad, they say that Imam has 1 million hadith, but his Musnad only has about 27,000. Imam Bukhari, they say he, about 600,000. But Sahih Bukhari is what? About 6,000 hadith, 5,000 hadith. We'll get to the number later, inshallah. Imam Malik, when he started writing Muwatta, he actually started off with about 10,000 hadith. But then it's gone down. The actual number of hadith are less than 1,000. So their objective wasn't, let me write everything that I have. No, whatever is needed and beneficial for the people, that's what they wrote down. Okay? And this is actually taken from hadith of the Prophet ﷺ. In a hadith of the Prophet ﷺ narrated by Ibn Majah. Ibn Majah, hadith number 35. And so Ibn Majah 35 and Imam Ahmad in his Musnad, hadith number 22,538. 22538.
What was the second hadith?
Ahmad 22538. 22,538. 22,538. And authenticated by Al-Albani. He says, the Al-Albani in his Sahihah, number 1753. For those of you that 1753. Anyways, the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, that the Prophet ﷺ said on the minbar. He said on the minbar, إِيَّاكُمْ وَكَثْرَةُ الْحَدِيثِ عَنِّي. Beware of narrating too much from me. فَمَنْ قَالَ عَلَيَّ فَلْيَقُلْ حَقًّا أَوْ صِدْقًا. So whoever says regarding me, then let him speak the truth or truthfully. وَمَنْ تَقَوَّلَ عَلَيَّ مَا لَمْ أَقُلْ. And whoever says regarding me that which I have not said, and whoever says regarding me that which I have not said, فَلْيَتَبَوَّأْ مَقْعَدَهُ مِنَ النَّارِ. Then let him take his seat in the hellfire. Then let him take his seat in the hellfire. So you can see in this hadith, the Prophet is telling people not to narrate just for the sake of narrating, but to make sure that when they narrate with precision, not to make mistakes, say what the Prophet ﷺ said. So from this hadith, the ulama acted upon this hadith in their books, and their objective of writing wasn't to show off, and it wasn't to just show how much knowledge that they have, but to be precise, concise, and also only that which is beneficial and that which the people are able to take in. The second point, which is a general methodology of the scholars, is that they would authenticate hadith. So generally, they would look into that hadith and only narrate that which they saw to be authentic and strong, and that which is that which can be used as a proof. Generally, unless there was a reason for them mentioning something weak. Okay, and sometimes it's also important to know that sometimes you may say that this hadith is weak. Maybe it's weak according to you or to a scholar that you are following. Maybe that Imam who wrote it, he thought it to be authentic. And people could make mistakes. Ibn Abbas, he said, إن كنت لأسأل عن الأمر الواحد, I used to ask regarding one matter, 30 من أصحاب النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم, 30 of the companions of the Prophet صلى الله عليه وسلم. So I used to ask for one matter, 30 of the companions of the Prophet صلى الله عليه وسلم. And the chain is mentioned by Khatib and Faqih and Faqih, and Imam al-Zahabi in Sir Alam al-Nubala, and Imam al-Zahabi said in Sir that it's not Sahih, it's authentic. It's an authentic statement of Ibn Abbas. The third point is that they used to criticize the narrations. What that means is that they would look into the chain of narration, and if something was weak, they would mention. If there was a liar, they would know, and they wouldn't, mention that in their books, and so on, as we mentioned previously. The next point is that they used to, and this links to the first point, but they used to narrate, they would not used to narrate that which would go over the heads of the people. They would not narrate that which would go over the heads of the people. Meaning they would speak to the people according to their level. Meaning, and this is an important lesson for us as well, it's not always just because you've learned something, it's not necessary that every single situation you have to tell the person everything. Okay? Because there are some knowledge which will go over the heads of the people, or it could be haram for you to mention, because by you mentioning it, it could cause more corruption. Ali radiallahu anhu said, حَدِّثُ النَّاسَ بِمَا يَعْرِفُونَ. Or in the narration, بِمَا يَعْقِلُونَ. Speak to the people with what they can understand. أَتُرِيدُونَ أَن يُكَذِّبَ اللَّهَ وَرَسُولَهُ. Do you want them to disbelieve in Allah as Messenger? The first person knows nothing about Islam. the first thing you want to talk about is intricacies in this and ilal, and you want to talk about this and the people in the chain. The person does not pray, why keep talking about those things? Yeah, he's going to think, oh, what's going on here, and then that's it, let's leave. Yeah? Ibn Mas'ud radiallahu anhu, he says, ما أنت بمحدث قوم حديثا لا تبلغ عقولهم إلا كان لبعضهم فتنة. That you are not going to be speaking to a people and mentioning a hadith that does not reach their intellect, except that you will become a fitna for some of them. You will become a trying tribulation for some of them. They won't understand what you're talking about. And this is what the Prophet ﷺ did as well. When he mentioned, it's in the first chapter of Kitab al-Tawheed as well, right? Where he mentioned to Mu'adh radiallahu anhu, the right of Allah is that you worship Him and you don't shirk with Him. But the right of the people is that if you were to worship Allah with Tawheed, not shirk with Him, Allah will enter you into paradise and reward you. So, or said something similar to that. And then Mu'adh radiallahu anhu said, أَفَلَا أُبَشِّرُ النَّاسِ Should I not tell the people this? That if they worship Allah alone, they get Jannah. Should I not inform the people and give them glad tidings? The Prophet ﷺ said, لا تبشرهم فيتكلوا. Don't inform them of this. Why? فيتكلوا, because they will become lazy. They'll think, well, just as long as you worship Allah, that'll be fine, we don't need to do everything else. So the Prophet told me, I have not to tell people this. So has to be a balance between concealing knowledge and speaking, only speaking and telling the people when there's a need, and not to just do it for the sake of showing off or to cause fitna or anything like that. You see, for example, certain people are falling into big issues. They commit shirk and they're committing these major bid'at which can take out the fall of the religion. Don't start arguing with them with maybe just making dua after salah. The after salah, yeah, it's not from the sunnah, but it's not on the level of going to the grave and says to the grave. You know, if they're doing that, they're not going to accept it. Dua, yeah. After salah, it's a good time to make dua. Obviously, doing it in congregation, that's what's not accepted, right? But if they're doing these big things, don't start arguing with these on the small things, right? Yeah, it's knowledge and what they're doing is wrong, but you have to look at the situation. And you have to know what is beneficial for people and what isn't. Another thing is that they used to be very careful when they had a doubt. They were very careful when they had a doubt. So many a time, if they had a doubt, they will mention that. So many times, in the hadith, when you hear the Prophet ﷺ said this and this, or this and this, that doesn't necessarily mean the Prophet ﷺ said oh. Sometimes the narrator who said oh. He said either he said this or he said this. I can't remember. They had a little doubt, so they mentioned it. Or if they mentioned what the Prophet said, but they had a doubt with exactly in this wording, they would say at the end, "O kama qal," which means along the lines. In English, we would say along the lines of. Okay, there's a hadith. For time I mentioned the reference. It's authentic. It's in Ibn Majah, hadith number 23. Ibn Majah, hadith number 23. You can read that. That's an example of Ibn Mas'ud doing the same thing. He mentioned something, and in the end, at the end, he says either that or a bit more, or a bit less, or similar. He has a bit of doubt, so he's mentioned that I have a doubt. I'm not so sure. And Imam Nawawi, he mentions that ينبغي له إذا اشتبه عليه لفظة فقرأها على شك أو يقول عقيبه أو كما قال. That it's befitting that if a person he's got a doubt in something, either he says, person said this, or at the end he says, or كما قال, along the lines of. So two more quick points, inshallah, we finish. The muhaddithun, sometimes they would use rams. Rams is basically, it says symbols or abbreviations. Basically, when they would write, because they would write a lot, they would sometimes abbreviate certain things. So, for example, there's one common one which is known as ha. They just put a letter ha. That ha is known as ha or tahweel. Basically, same hadith, but they're mentioning two different narrations. Okay, so for example, I know a hadith, Naeem hears it, and then he narrates it to Rafiq, who mentions it to Kabir, who mentions it to Tanzil. But then there's another narration where Naeem, he mentioned Rafiq mentioned Uthman, and he mentioned Uncle Fiyas. So, what the narrator will do, he'll mention me, Naeem, Rafiq, and he will say, Ha, meaning, from here, we're starting a new chain, and he'll mention again, and then, he mentioned this, he mentioned this chain, and he'll say Ha, and then go back to Rafiq and mention the other chain, basically. Yeah? So that instead of writing the whole chain again, in the middle, you say, from here, there's one that goes this way, there's one that goes that way. And that word is actually called tahweel. Tahweel means to change, right, from the narration. But they use for hada instead. And some ulama, when they're reading it, some will, when they're reading it here, they will say ha, just for that ha. Or some will actually say what it stands for, which is tahweel. Another way is haddathana. You hear that a lot, right? Then instead of haddathana, they just put thana. Tha and nun and alif. Okay? And sometimes it's just a nun and alif. Just a nun and alif. For akhbarana, sometimes it's just ana. It's for ana. It's for that. And so on. Why? Because they're constantly writing this. In one hadith, they're writing it, 10, 15 times. In one hadith, So just make it easier, they will do that. And the last point which I'm going to mention, which is, you could say also an extension of the previous point, but they would stick to the etiquettes of writing hadith. They'll stick to the etiquettes of writing hadith. And the etiquettes are many, meaning they'll be precise in their writing and so on, but the one which I want to mention is an exception from the previous point, which is, when the previous point is that the ulama would have symbols and so on, right, and abbreviations. They would do that, but not when it comes to saying sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Not when it comes to saying sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. When it comes to writing sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, they would write that for you. So you wouldn't write Sad Lam Alif Maqsura, the one that looks like a yah. Or Sal'am, Sad Lam Ayn Mim, so they write that, sallallahu for each word. Or in English you can say SAW. They wouldn't do that. None of the early scholars or none of the muhaddithun ever did that. And came to sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, they write sallallahu alayhi wa sallam fully. That's why for even us, when you're writing notes or writing, when you're texting someone a hadith, try your best not to write SAW. Because none of the muhaddithun did that. They will write sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Yeah, it can take a long. No, it take a long, but now we have shortcuts. Write SAW, it automatically becomes sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. In fact, you write in English, you go to settings and the Arabic will come up, right? So it's not difficult. So we should also, out of just from the etiquette of writing, is that when it comes to sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, that we should write the whole thing.
If you can't write in Arabic, what do you write?
Right,
peace be upon you.
Right, it's better at sallallahu alayhi wa sallam.
Why you can't write in Arabic? The English words.
Right, so transliteration. Type in English, sallallahu, S-A and
Right in English.
transliteration, in English, yeah.
So you know, like,
But if you get a shortcut, what I'll do today in the group, I'll send sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. What you guys need to do, go to settings, keyboard, shortcuts, and in the shortcuts you could have, I don't know what it's called, but in the first line you write what you would write, and the second line you would write what you want to get changed into. So even if you write SAW, automatically your phone will change it into sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Very quick. I'll send that. If you've got any more, radiallahu anhu, if anyone's got any of those, wa assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, so we can do it for Islam. I want to change it, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. And I can tell people are sending salam, and it's got all the harakat on. Like this guy's done that. There's no way he's sat there writing the harakat. Now read the question.
so for example, when we write it on the paper, when you're narrating a hadith, so sometimes when there's loads to write, I just leave a space.
Just leave a space, adding later. That's fine. Leave a space, adding later, inshallah. Okay, I want to start on Mu'ta al-Malik, but we'll stop here, inshallah. No, it's good. Next week, inshallah, we'll start from, we'll actually start with the actual books. Mu'ta al-Malik, and inshallah, we'll take مصنفات الكتب. مصنف ابن شيبة، مصنف عبد الرزاق. we'll stop here. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك، أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت، أستغفرك وأتوب إليك.